Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to this session on data science in the news. This is convened by the QUT Centre for Data Science and the Queensland Academy of the Arts and Sciences. I'm Kerrie Mengersen, a Distinguished Professor of Statistics, and I'm Director of the Centre for Data Science here at QUT, and I'm your moderator for today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagara people as the First Nations owners of the land where QUT now stands. And I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country from where you're joining us today. I pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and recognise that these lands have always been places of research, teaching, and learning. The Data Science in the News series focuses on the role of data and the way that data shapes our decisions in topical issues of the day. Of course, one of these issues right now is playing out in our courts and in our lives, and it's Robodebt. The Robodebt Royal Commission has been in the news lately, with recent hearings taking place here in Brisbane. So what is this Robodebt inquiry all about? What was the AI approach underpinning Robodebt? Are all AI approaches bad for society? Or are there some good examples? And the failure of this AI tool, Robodebt, has had a devastating impact on so many people. So what should we do differently to avoid a failure like Robodebt in the future? We from the Centre for Data Science have brought together some of our centre experts to shed some lights on these questions. And I'd like to introduce you to our panel. Our first panel member is Professor Adam Clements. Adam is a member of the School of Economics and Finance at QUT, and he's a research domain leader in the QUT Centre for Data Science. His main research interests relate to financial and time series econometrics, often focusing on issues around financial risk. Our second panel member is Professor Richie Nyack. Richie is a professor in the School of Computer Science here at QUT. She's also the Deputy Director of the Centre for Data Science. She's an internationally recognised expert in machine learning, data mining, and text mining. Our third panel member is Professor Patrick Wickstrom. Patrick is a Professor of Communication and the Director of QUT's Digital Media Research Centre and an Associate Investigator in the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision-Making and Society. His research is focused on how AI-generated recommendations shape the lives of everyday citizens, consumers, and creators. And our fourth panel member is Professor Melissa Bull. Melissa is also a co-lead in the Centre for Data Science, and she has expertise in the fields of governance and regulation with a focus on the networked policing. She's partnered with many areas of government to deliver research that is policy relevant. She's the Director of the Centre for Justice here at QUT. So you can see we have a great lineup of panel members with diverse expertise from business through to computer science, through to communication, through to social justice. And so with these panel members, what I'm going to do is to ask each of them to touch on an element of the Robodebt issue that's been playing out at the moment. And they'll have about 5 minutes or so just to expand on their answer. And then we're going to come back to a set of questions at the end. So if you, as the listeners, would like to put some questions in the Q&A, please do so, and we'll touch on those at the end of the general questions to the panel members. So Adam, I'm going to start with you. So as a leader in business, can you provide with us with some background? What was the Robodebt inquiry about? What was the economic or government motivation behind developing an automated method in the first place? Over to you.
Right, thanks, Kerrie. I'll just share my screen here and a few slides to talk to answer that question. Okay, so what I'll do in the next 5 minutes is to give a little bit of background to the scheme and some of the motivation for why the government of the time went down this path. I guess, I don't want to get into the sort of legalities and social issues and so forth. I mean, that will be things that some of my colleagues will talk about today. For an individual to be eligible for Centrelink welfare payments, these calculations are based on an individual's income. So an individual who's applying for welfare benefits to Centrelink has to declare their recent income to Centrelink. Now, a crucially important issue here is that income, of course, during the year for many people can vary a lot. Sometimes seasonal workers and the like might be working quite a lot at particular times of the year and not so much at other times of the year. So there can be a lot of variability in the amount of income earned by certain individuals. And of course, that will influence their eligibility for certain types of welfare payments during the year. Now, another issue is that income tax, a personal income tax that we'll sort of tie together in a minute, personal income tax that we all pay via the ATO, the Australian Tax Office, is of course based on our personal income, given the tax schedules of the day. But of course, ATO data, our sort of declared annual personal income tax for tax purposes, is based on the full year, the entire year. So of course, this doesn't take into account any of the possible variability during the year. And this kind of mismatch between variability in income during the year and an average or a total income is the crucially important issue that's driven a lot of the problems with this scheme. Now, there has been, and this goes back for many decades, a long history, well before the Robodebt scandal and scheme. There's been a long history of income matching. So that the Australian Tax Office has a long history of cross-checking income declared on personal tax lodgements each year against other sources of information. And so this has been done for a long time, obviously at a manual level, but for checking essentially the correctness and accuracy of our declarations on our income, on our tax lodgement. Now, in 2000, back around 2001, a system of income matching was starting to be developed that was linked to Centrelink applications, and so there was a link then bought, or sort of a link, I guess, started between income declarations that can vary a lot during the year and ATO data, which is this fixed sort of one annual number. And so basically what was going on was that ATO annual income tax or income declarations were averaged over a year and then compared against the declarations that individuals made to Centrelink over smaller windows of time during a year. And so this mismatch in variability for a lot of people has been the big sort of driver of this huge crisis and this huge scandal with this scheme. Now, when this system was first developed, and it's a manual system at this point, there were around about 300,000 discrepancies, give or take, identified, but with a much smaller number investigated, circa 20,000 by hand each year. Now, let's fast forward a good few years. So around 2015, 2016, there was a lot of discussion at a Commonwealth government level around looking at budget savings to be had from trying to recoup debts owed by welfare recipients. So during this mid-2010s, an online compliance intervention scheme was developed, as it was called at the time, and it was the first of an example of an automated system to compare these smoothed tax declarations or average tax declarations from income declarations via tax against Centrelink income declarations. Now, at this time, the new system was estimated, was believed at the time to be able to issue or generate around 20,000 debt notices per week, as opposed to 300,000 per year, with only 20,000 being able to be checked by hand. Now, another crucial issue that I'm sure a couple of my colleagues will build on is that the onus of proof moved from the government trying to prove that the welfare recipients had been overpaid. The onus of proof had been shifted to the welfare recipients themselves, and they had to prove that they hadn't been overpaid. And I'm sure, as I said, I'm sure that this is an issue that will come up on in further detail with my colleagues in a few minutes. I thought I'd throw in as well as a last point. The Robodebt was not a government coined term, but something coined by the media as this sort of scandal unfolded. But I guess I'll just leave everyone with the important sort of, I suppose, motivation, at least from the government's perspective, of why this all sort of kicked off, and that was to try and recoup what they saw to be sort of $1 billion+ savings for the Commonwealth budget by being able to sort of scale up this checking and debt recovery system. So thanks very much, everyone. I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I'll pass back to Kerrie. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adam. Did the recovery scheme or the automated scheme find in favour of some of the people and actually deliver rebates or returns to people, or was it only debt recovery?
Well, I mean, the idea was that people were issued with debt recovery notices, and they had to come up with physical proof that during this particular time that the debts were linked to, that they weren't being overpaid. And there were even many instances where debt notices had been placed so far back in time, or were linked to so far back in time, that they actually had no physical proof, because it was past the point at which people were required to keep physical records for all of these purposes. So it's not a case of the Robodebt scheme exonerating people, but people had to. It was essentially exactly the reverse. People had to go through the terrible experience of exonerating themselves.
Okay, thanks very much, Adam. And I'm sure there's, as we've all those who've been following the case are aware, there's been a fair bit of revelation in terms of the concerns that people had at the time when this was being rolled out as well. But Richie, I'm going to turn now to you. So as a leader in the field of computer science, can you give us some insight into actually what was this method? What was the automated method? How did it work? And why did it fail at a technical level?
Thanks, Kerrie. So as a machine learning researcher, I'm glad to inform that it was not a machine learning or data mining algorithm. So what it means, it did not really use any historical data or made any intelligent inferencing or decisions out of them. It was actually a pure data matching algorithm. So that's why a lot of time in media, it's being called as algorithmic decision-making technology. So, and that it was named as Online Compliance Intervention Program. So as Adam was saying, that it actually compared the data from ATO and data from Centrelink, find out the discrepancies, and then compute the overpayment amount, and then issue the debt notices. So there was nothing really new in this kind of mechanism, as Adam was saying too, that it was done manually for many, many years. What was new under this OCI program, that they tried to automate this scheme. And this automated was presented as a guaranteed solution to ensuring that people will get what they are entitled to, no more and no less. So let's see, how does this technology really function? So the first step here is record matching. So what you do, you have the data from Centrelink and data from ATO. So the first task is to find out these two connected databases. So for example, A1 here would refer to B1 in this another data set. Now, there are very complications, but we'll see later on. First, I'll present the technology, and then I'll talk about where could it fail there. Now, the second step is once the records are meshed, then the income was meshed. And as Adam was preluding that, ATO reports annual income, whereas Centrelink stores fortnightly benefits and the reported income. So what it meant, to compare two entities with the same values, ATO income was averaged across the fortnight or for the part of the fortnight where the recipient received the payment. And those average amounts were treated as the actual earning. And then the entitlements were based on the income averaged from the ATO. Now, the third step was, once we have got this checking, and if the discrepancies was found, then the potential overpayment and a letter was issued. And it was automatically sent to the recipient. And now the next point was, if they wanted to respond to this letter, there was an online system where everyone had to access it and then provide their output. And if the discrepancies were not rectified within a certain period, about 3 weeks, date was raised. This technology was found very efficient when they applied. For example, they were able to do 20,000 manual checks a year, but with this one, now they were doing 20,000 a week under this automated scheme. So it was very efficient. What really went wrong then? So let's see a little bit into the context of data science. So this left side figure shows a traditional data science process. People will do the business understanding first. So that was the first step where this scheme failed, because it believed that data and data-led knowledge are neutral objects of truth on which policy can be implemented. So usually in this business understanding steps, rules are formed, and the business rules are validated and make their feasibility assessment whether they could be implemented. In here, as Adam was saying, the basic premise that the ATO income can be averaged over the fortnight, and then that can be compared. So that was a major flaw. Once we have this business understanding set under the data science programs, then we move on to data understanding, data preparation, modeling, kind of technical one. So during these steps, we really check that the data that we are coming is correct. There are no potential biases or error introduced. But through this data matching algorithm, and we'll see later very soon when I give a little bit more detail how it go. So it introduced some errors. And once these modeling or the systems are built, the next crucial step is evaluation. And there are no evidence really with the Robodebt that this system was really gone through thorough testing or even the pilot testing. And the last step in this process is deployment, where the application is deployed, and the deployment usually happens at the scale and understanding the people's capability. So in here in Robodebt, the government and the schemers, people, they overestimated digital literacy. So the system was completely online. However, a very high proportion of Centrelink clients were not really digitally literate. So that was another very misled assumption there. And lastly, like there were not really any safeguards placed. There was no human in loop. It was completely automated process. So let's quickly see each steps and where it could go wrong. So for example, like record matching, what happens, we have sophisticated string matching programs that would match the name of people like JPM here and John Pipe Manufacturing here. So we do have to consider a lot of variants, acronyms, and abbreviation to match. And that's where the system may have failed. And also the data quality error. There was not really much consideration of this erroneous data entries. Then it failed at the step 2 level. I would not go much, but the basic premise that the average income, so it didn't really work well because the formula used, it did really exaggerated this in debt. And also, as we always talk about in AI systems, bias. So this automated algorithm was biased against certain groups, like for part-timers, casual workers, and students who only worked really certain periods. And the third step where it failed was the poor mode of communication. We all know this digital-only interface. And this letter was sent to last known address. And people really moved on. They were not in those addresses and so on. People were given only very limited time. And most importantly, because of not the digitally literate or any human in loop steps, most recipients were not able to respond to their request for giving the fortnightly record. So all these really a poor mode of communication with the bias that the system introduced, this system failed.
Thanks very much, Richie. That was great. Just a couple of questions I have. So you talked at the beginning about this being a data matching exercise and not a machine learning or AI exercise or algorithm. And so a lot of it's been portrayed as an AI algorithm. So can you just explain then just a bit more about the difference there? You went through the process of the sort of the data science cycle, but what's the difference then between this data matching and the machine learning or AI?
So AI, machine learning, or data mining is usually the pattern recognition. So given historical data or observation, these tools would like to identify patterns, the regularities, the common rules, patterns that exist in the data. Then they would use these regular patterns to apply in future. And then they would predict the future events. So for example, if Robodebt had used machine learning, so what they would have done on the historical, let's say 2005 to 2015 data, they analyzed that how people report their income, then what kind of payments they receive, and then the system would have made some patterns that which are the more fraudulent activities, which are not fraudulent activities. Once the system has got these patterns, they would have applied to now the future people coming, whoever is now coming to their door asking for the payment. And then they would see whether this person matches to fraudulent pattern or non-fraudulent pattern. And then they would have this potential overpayment credit. So they did not do any that kind of historical observation mining process. What they did, they just did the algorithm. So they built the algorithm that does the data matching, find the discrepancies. That was done by human before. But now they removed all the humans in loop and they completely made it automated.
Okay, thanks, Richie. And so this was at a time then they were really mimicking the manual system that was in place then.
Yeah.
So do you see that like if this was being built now, that it would be just at a technical level, do you see that they would do something different, or would they like, are the tools different now? Are we sort of like putting a current lens, technical lens on something that was happening back then? Like at the time, was this sort of state of the art?
So luckily, the one thing that has happened now, we have got now much better regulation in terms of data sharing. So that has been placed in 2021, 2022, some regulatory framework. And I'm pretty sure that Melissa would go more upon to them. So thanks to those regulatory framework and the system level, now they have got the system where the matching could happen at annual level. It does not have to be averaged over the fortnight. So those system the data recording systems have become now much better, because that was one of the major flaw behind the Robodebt scheme. And I think in today's it happened, they might put some intelligent automation there. So it's not completely manual check, but some intelligent check over there.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Richie. Very interesting and very helpful. So, Melissa, Richie referred to you, and you're a leader in the field of justice and social justice. So the failure of this ML and AI tool, which is not an ML AI tool, it's a data matching tool, really has had a devastating impact on so many people. And we all acknowledge that that terrible impact at a social and personal level. So, but as professionals involved in data science in our business, what do we need to do differently when we're developing these kinds of tools? What messages can we take from this Robodebt issue and learn from that when we're developing new tools?
Thanks, Kerrie. That's a great question. And I think, one of the most important things that we can learn from this is that we need to be conscious of context. So the tool was developed through Services Australia. And you might think, okay, so it was a debt recovery tool under that auspices. And the service was to the Australian government. But the history of Services Australia is that it's actually the department that delivers our social safety net. So previously, Services Australia was the Department of Human Services, and before that, the Department of Social Security. If you think about those names, Services Australia, Department of Human Services, Department of Social Security, humans have been erased. The purpose of that department has sort of disappeared. And I'm talking about the broad context here, but I'll bring it back to the individual. And this is something that's happened in relation to government. Initially, the concerns of government was around the security and well-being of population, but in sort of, neoliberal context or recent times, the focus of government has gone much further away from thinking about the well-being of population to demonstrating that they're governing in an efficient and economic way, which I think Robodebt is sort of a really good example of that. So if you think about the humans being left out, when I started looking into this a bit more deeply, what I discovered was that Digital Transformations Australia, which was the body that the government relied on to help inform them on how to bring the population along with them with these transformations, were locked out of the process. Centrelink staff, who were the public face that dealt with people in day-to-day, they were also locked out of the process. They weren't consulted, although they bore the brunt. And the people receiving benefits weren't taken into account. And both Adam and Richie have referred to these people. We need to, one in every two households in Australia, there's somebody that relies on Centrelink. It's very diverse. People in this context often have irregular work, they have complex lives, they often have complex health problems, they often experience social disadvantage. Richie mentioned levels of data literacy, that often are in insecure housing. So these are really important things, but when the risk analysis was done, the only risk that was identified was the potential cost of the program, not the harm that might happen to people. So this largely automated, the system was automated. It was a letter that removed humans from the notice going out to following up on compliance. There was no oversight. From a justice point of view, it removed procedural justice, and how we define procedural justice or procedural fairness is around transparency, accountability, voice, and fairness. So there was no transparency in how the debt was calculated, and there were some problems that we've heard about that. There was no accountability. So what I mean by that is Services Australia didn't have to account for how they calculated the debt or prove anything. So there was and this is, I think Adam mentioned, there was a reversal of onus of proof. Now, this is really interesting because in the criminal law, reversal of onus of proof is reserved for the most serious crimes, like major drug traffickers, things that are really big problems. Most of the people who had debts here, their average debt was $1,400. So this also feeds into a narrative that does tend to dehumanize people who are receiving benefits, cast them as, you know, we've heard narratives in the past as them being undeserving, as being dole bludgers. And in the context of Robodebt and its launch, they were accused of fraud, that they were consciously defrauding the government. And I think there's some serious questions about that construction of them, particularly when we think about from the outset, the government, its own advice, even before the system was launched, was that it was unlawful, and it chose not to listen to that. Going back to procedural fairness, voice is another important thing, that people who are accused of a crime, or they should have an opportunity to have their voices heard. So in the letter, there was no 1-800 number where people could get further information. In the past, when people had debts like this, they were offered legal advice, financial advice, counselling and case management to support them through compliance. None of that happened. So for me, I think the problem is being aware of the context, but keeping the people in. So the importance of co-designing and testing with all the stakeholders, and whether that's, you know, the people who are delivering the service, training the staff, upskilling them technically, maintaining opportunities for oversight, but retaining, I think if you're a data science person, retaining a critical eye, and that might be difficult because, you know, it comes from that big picture that you might not be aware of. So partnering with other expertise like social scientists. And so if you do that, you know, you can question what is the objective of this department. Is it about balancing the budget in the face of an election? Or is it about the security and well-being of the population?
Thanks very much, Melissa. Great questions and great comments, and a really strong reminder to, you know, keep the human in the loop. I'm interested because you know, and I made this comment a little earlier. It's easy to, or we often look at these kinds of events with the eyes of our current eyes, rather than the eyes of the time. So in the context of the time, you were talking about there were these usual sorts of mechanisms for people to support mechanisms. So do you see that the rollout of this process was appropriate for the time, or was it something that was not appropriate even at that time?
No, I don't think it was even appropriate at that time. I think, you know, again, there's been a growing tension within government about whether it's important to have the budget in the black, or whether it's important to have, you know, a thriving population that actually can contribute to an economy. And I think in many ways, the government at the time, and I think this is something that all our governments need to keep in mind, that the purpose of government is making sure that we have, ensuring the well-being of the population, because if we have that, then we're going to have a stronger economy. It's not just about having, you know, a good number when we balance the budget.
Okay, thank you very much. That's excellent. Patrick, I'm going to turn to you now. So the Robodebt debacle has really highlighted some of the pitfalls of using automated approaches and data-focused approaches, and as an extension then AI and design and implementation. So as a leader in the field of data and digital and AI, are all of our AI projects doomed to this kind of failure? Or what are some examples of some successful machine learning and AI approaches that have really benefited our community?
Thank you for that question, Kerrie. And I hope that I can make us feel a bit better at the end of well, not the end, but anyway, this Friday afternoon. So I will talk about some successful examples, because Robodebt is often used as an example of the harm that AI systems cause, which is interesting, as we've heard, it's not an ML based or an AI based system in the first place. But anyway, let us look at a couple of examples, and I should start with that, since my area is recommendations. This is probably the area where we meet ML and artificial intelligence the most in our daily lives, in platforms where we're getting help to sift through information and whatever it might be. And this is definitely benefiting communities, but it's also harmful, right? It's we hear that all the time, how these platforms are doing both good and bad. And another way that AI is used that we encounter on a daily basis is to improve our productivity. In many of our email softwares these days, you get help, like in the middle top examples there, with how to respond to an email automatically, or at least with some nudging. And at the top right, if you haven't heard of Sapia, you should have a look at that. It's an Australian company trying to use AI, or not trying, the product is using AI to increase the productivity and the efficiency of recruitments, which is great for some communities, but also has an awful lot of problems associated with it. But if you want to be more, really find some examples that are where AI and machine learning have been used for a common good. One model to take with you is the UN's Sustainable Development Goals that many of you probably have seen, where you can use this framework to analyze and evaluate all kinds of things. Universities are using it to evaluate themselves, and technologies can be used for it too. And so this is a way to get a sense of how is an AI implementation, whatever it might be, actually leading to something good. And there was a report a few years ago, then several of these, but anyway, one that I really thought was quite good, which I encourage you to have a look at, was published by McKinsey a few years ago, and where they tried to map different AI implementations across the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, but also across other areas. And I think this slide shows a good representation of a number of AI products that they identified. And as you can see, the numbers there in the little circles are how many they found. There are obviously more, so they found some of them. So, but the biggest group were AI products or services that were addressing issues related to health and hunger. And the second largest one was were AI implementations focused on environment, climate change, energy efficiency, and so on and so forth. And the third one focused on crisis response. And I think you when you see this, you start to get, I hope you're getting a bit hopeful, because you see that there are lots and lots of AI implementation examples of AI and machine learning that are actually doing some really good stuff for our society. So I just picked, I'm not sure if I picked the good ones, but at least some that I liked, 5, I think, or something like that, that I'd like to say a few things of. So Microsoft has developed an app that is pretty amazing, that's called Seeing AI. There are a couple of other things, apps doing the same thing, but it's supporting visually impaired users and just to make sense of the world around them, and to turn a scene, where you might be, into a sentence and describing what is in that sentence, in that image. Sorry, another example is another of the big tech companies. Google have been working with the First Peoples Cultural Council, not in our country, but in Canada in this case, to document and transcribe and translate endangered languages in that country. So that's another example. And a third one, if we focus on culture, from Netherlands, where AI have been used to analyze brush strokes and been able to identify forgery and the histories of specific works. You probably have heard horrible stories about something that is called predictive policing, and I'm sure Melissa can say things about that, where AI have been used for something very bad, which is to target and to classify potential individuals who the police would assume are might be doing something illegal or something of that kind in the future. That has been a range of problems with that. So just to counter that, I think this one is a good example. The Human Rights Data Analysis Group been using machine learning to analyze and understand where the police and other such agencies have actually been doing the opposite and been causing social injustices and other human rights abuses. So I picked that one for that reason. And the last one that I just want to mention is about mental health. And in these days of ChatGPT and which you might have heard of, and a new generation of chat-based artificial intelligence. These might be a bit old, but anyway, what these chatbots are doing, such as Robot and Wisa, they are providing mental health support for those communities and those individuals who, for various reasons, are unable or cannot really see a human being for support or therapy. So these ones are actually doing something, filling a really important gap in this space. So I could continue the entire afternoon, evening, and weekend and talk about these things, but I think the main message here is that yes, Robodebt was flawed in so many ways, but have hope. There are machine learning and AI are definitely making great contributions to us, the community. But I should say my job is very much to work on to point out the harms that technology might cause, and it is a very complex question how any technology is impacting society and community, and there's often some good parts of it and some negatives, so obviously. But I think the 5 that I showed you are pretty safe in the sense that they are clearly benefiting the community that it's addressing.
Thanks, Patrick. So what sorts of controls are around products that are released, AI/ML, data matching products that are released by governments or by private sectors for this kind of work? So, for example, a mental health program is released, or a social services program is released. Are there now some controls around that? And if so, what kinds of frameworks would you be envisaging being put in place for products like this?
Well, one
to mitigate
way,
risk.
yes, one way to address bias and harmful consequences of these systems are to do what is known as an audit. So there are consultancies and there are experts who are doing very structured audits of certain systems to reveal where are the biases, where are the harms, potential harms coming out of them, because it is a very complex question not in the case of Robodebt, that was pretty straightforward, but in many other cases there are it is very difficult to really see what harms are being caused, are the systems fair? Are they actually treating the different community groups in the same way, and so on and so forth? So those kinds of audits are what I would point at. In general, there is no system, and there are some, but not a generally accepted one where you can have a stamp of approval in the same way that we have with food security and whatever it might be, or with the medical technologies and so on and so forth. So, which is something that we should probably work on as a sector.
Okay, well, I hope you hurry up, because it'd be good to have it soon, I'm sure. So, would anybody else like to comment on the Patrick's examples or comments on the sort of safety aspects of current machine learning AI algorithms? Any of the other members?
Kerrie, I just had a question in this context, and I think it's really important to think in a balanced way about the benefits of AI as well as the risks. And I'm just, I think this debate is incredibly timely, because when I got home last night, I watched the end of the news, and there was a story about how 2/3 of Australians say that it's not enough's being done to protect them from, the unsafe AI. And so I guess, if there's that sense of a large proportion of the population feeling unsafe, and I mean the other thing about what happened with Robodebt, and when I was talking about fairness, when something like that happens, it actually undermines how the population, how people feel about, and the trust that they have in government. And you can only govern when you have consent and that trust. So I guess what I'm interested in is, from the technical side of things, are there things that we can do to improve that trust?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Melissa. Adam, from your perspective, do you see, from the sort of business perspective or from your own technical perspective, what do you see that? How would you answer Melissa's question?
I guess this is coming back to some of the stuff that Melissa was talking about during her presentation as well. I think it's kind of a prime example of the sort of corporatization of a lot of things, and that's not just in the government sort of sector, but I think the sort of trade-off between the costs and risk reward doesn't sort of stack up or make any sense here, right? The fact that there'd be, there's likely to be a very small number that may well be cheating the system, but to cause huge harm to so many people, it's just not worth it in any sort of common sense measure of sort of economic loss, I suppose, if you want to call it like that. But I suppose when people or organizations focus on such narrow definitions of just essentially just profit and loss in a dollar sense, well, these are the kinds of outcomes that you get. But there's a big there's a big sort of area of research in lots of different strands of economics that looks at bringing non-monetary things into either utility functions and how individuals make decisions, or how we evaluate things like large-scale projects for environmental impact and the like, right? So there are lots of different ways to actually do this if it's thought about far more carefully in a far more caring way.
Thanks, Adam. That's excellent. Richie, from your perspective.
I think as a technology designer, I would emphasize more on evaluation, and the second is inclusivity and diversity. So it's important when such systems are designed, all stakeholders are consulted. So we can only anticipate in Robodebt, if this scheme was designed and people who would be the recipient this kind of payments, if they were consulted and if their feelings and how they will feel was accounted for while designing this system, this may not have happened. So, and we have heard so many of machine learning and AI kind of system that if they do not include all kind of data, then they always have this bias towards a particular section of the data that they may be tested upon. And that's what happened in Robodebt. It might have covered the general population that had the regular income in every fortnight. But this system failed when it has the bias towards the people, they had very irregular fortnight income. So when we are building this system, we have to ensure that we are considering all possible uses of the system and where it could fail, where it's success. So the data and then the evaluation, they are two key aspects that one has to consider while building this type of system.
Yeah, thanks very much, Richie. I want to just touch very briefly, very briefly, just in a couple of minutes on one of the issues that was brought up was around the digital literacy and the data literacy. Obviously, that's improved over the last 5 or 6 or 8 years, or has it? So where are we at in terms of digital literacy? Patrick, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I would say that maybe the digital literacy has become, or we have realized that digital literacy is more complex an issue than it was perhaps a number of years ago. I'm not sure if it's better or worse, because you have new things that you need to learn about, new things you need to understand, and we're trying to keep up. So it's a hard one to say, okay, are we doing it better today than we did 5 or 10 years ago? What my take on this is something perhaps that is slightly different, that it's not enough with digital literacy to know about the technology and how you're using it and be online and click the right boxes. But what is perhaps even more important is to have a critical mindset, perhaps, and be able to manage and navigate the information and the decisions that are being automatically given, right? So that part of the literacy is as important, if not more important, than actually being able to navigate the devices and whatever it might be. And then you might say, how on earth should you deal with this? Because many of the AI systems or machine learning models that we had today, they're just impenetrable, right? We even the technology designers such as Richie don't understand how they work. So how are we supposed to expect that normal human beings should understand and be literate about these things? So it is a really challenging and complex question, and very, very important for our democracy and for our societies to hold together.
Yeah, thanks very much, Patrick. Would anybody like to add a 30-second comment to that?
I mean, I can only add from personal experience, you know, if I think about both my parents and in-laws, I mean, they're just not, there's huge chunks of the population still just at an age that just can't engage in any meaningful way, you know, and I guess they at least fall into the category where they're not having to change details all the time, but there are still lots of parts of the population that even don't physically have access to computing services a lot. So there's, you know, this is kind of creating a huge inequity along a range of different dimensions.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I strongly echo those comments. Richie or Melissa? Okay, I'm just going to go around now very quickly, and you, in 10 words or less, what is your message to the listeners about the learnings from Robodebt? What are the lessons from Robodebt? Adam, I'm going to start with you. You have 10 words.
Well, decisions need to be made with human costs in mind.
Perfect. Melissa? You're on mute, I think. No? No, a bit closer. No. No, you're not on mute, actually. It doesn't look like. Now you are on mute. No.
You can type them in.
Okay, maybe type it. Richie?
AI and ML can be your best friends if used wisely.
Perfect. Thank you. Patrick?
The importance of evaluation, as Richie talked about, how essential it is to test and test and test before deployment.
Great, thank you. And Melissa's is keep humans in the loop at all stages. Well, they're very wise words. Thank you very much to all the panel members. We started this conversation with the comment that we need the kinds of discussions that we've had today in order to really develop better products and to make better decisions based on data. We all need to be part of that conversation as we engage with really important issues such as machine learning, AI, and data-focused approaches that are building products that are going to affect all of us. So I've learned a lot from the discussion today. I want to thank all of the panelists for your time, your considered opinions and advice on data science in the news. And so thank you, Richie, Patrick, Melissa, and Adam. And thank you also to the Queensland Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Centre for Data Science for sponsoring this webinar series. And particular thanks to Becky Cook and Tim McCougar from the QUT Centre for Data Science for all their help in organising and promoting the series. And finally, thanks to you, our audience. So from the Centre for Data Science, take care and bye for now. See you next time, our next webinar. Bye.